research by Levada Center, supported by us and by you. The research was carried out at schools of Novosibirsk, Yaroslavl, and Volgograd regions. Those were in-depth interviews attempting to understand how civic values are perceived, how patriotism is received by teachers, school children, students, staff of schools, officials of education departments. You can really have a look at those books, but unfortunately Mr. Levinson failed to attend the session because of some family problems. Right now you'll have a presentation by Professor Jeffrey Hosking, and tomorrow, instead of the professor, we will have the session with Dmitry Gorin, who is our graduate and professor from Bryansk. I would like to introduce Professor Jeffrey Hosking to you. I think many of you know that person. We published his books, and for many years he has been attending and speaking at the school's seminars. We are proud of that because Jeffrey is one of the best trainers and a very dedicated person to our school. We published the book of Mr. Hoskins, but he's also a historian, and I think you know that the professor is one of the most prominent researchers of Russia's history in the West. He is an honorable member of the UK Academy of Sciences, a professor of the London University, and honorable doctor of Russian history in the Russian Academy of History. And this current session will be held in the format that is customary to us. So first the expert will speak, and then we'll have the round table, Q&A, discussions. So please get prepared. Okay, so I'll speak on the trust today, trust to shape civic consciousness. Recently in the UK, I published a book on the trust. Since being a historian, I came to a conclusion that trust and mistrust represent a deep, in-depth grammar of any society, and trust is more important than we usually think of it. Specifically, when you think how you can shape this civic society, you come to a conclusion that a high degree of trust is very important for that. And I'll try to prove to you that it's really the case and what is to be done to improve trust. One may ask, why do we need that trust? I can explain. The matter is that the world and our society are too complex in order to explore them totally. Most of the time we stay ignorant and when we think of the future, we cannot have all the relevant information. We tend to simplify the world and shape it along our customary lines. And trust plays a great role in any situation in our lives, since all the time there are some dark gaps, and that's exactly where trust and mistrust do matter. In other words, trust is essential in order to explore the world and in order to take decisions coping with all our life situations. Unlike many social researchers and theoreticians, I assume that trust most of the time is not consciousness, based on our conscious, and we really think of it only when the trust is not justified. And while mistrust is a more conscious thing for us. It can be explained by our early experience when a child, because in our first years we totally dependent on our parents. We totally trust them, and we have no choice. And the idea itself that there could be choice is not something that a child's head can accommodate. So this idea is totally unconscious, and this trust, the habit of trust, lasts for entire life with the people. In order to illustrate that, I can refer to some very ordinary example. We frequent fly now, but if the airplane is not operational, is not functional fully, we can die in that accident. Something is buzzing. I feel like not trusting that equipment. So if the airplane functions badly, we can die. So before we board a plane, we watch very closely all rivets on the aircraft's surface, and we also think of pilots' qualifications, of the qualifications of mechanics. No, we never do that. And it means that we just trust the crew. But what makes us confident that we do not put our life at risk when we fly? So first of all, we trust the airline, because the airline is strongly interested in avoiding any accident. We trust pilots. We trust engineers, believing that they have prepared the airplane appropriately and did their job well. So it means that this is a trust to people, to teams, and to institutions which those people represent. We also trust such sciences as aeronautics, metallurgy, and we trust the theory of flying. And it's often time that we trust some area of science. Although we are not experts in that science, but we believe that it works exactly like that. Also, we know that it's very rare cases when airplanes crash. Where do we know that from? From mass media. And mass media always reports if there is an accident, if an airplane crashes, it tops the newsline, and with that we trust mass media. I'm an old man. I remember the times of the Soviet Union, and I can remember that a lot of my friends and people who I knew didn't fly the Aeroflot airplanes, because no radio, no newspapers never reported on Aeroflot planes accidents. And that's why one of the people who I knew suspected that those accidents had been quite frequent. There was even a saying that Aeroflot will bury you quickly, efficiently, and without extra charges. And as you can see, when we fly, prerequisites about trust are quite complex, and it's not conscious trust. We don't think of that when we board the plane. So it's commonly with the trust in general. So trust is much more complex phenomenon than we usually think of that, and mostly it's unconscious thing. What does it mean for civic society? What are the reasons or prerequisites can be there in the civic society for social trust? Basic things can tell us that it's probably about peace and order in the streets, in our homes. We should be confident that when we are leaving our homes, we are safe and nobody would attack us. seems to be quite elementary, but it's not common in all the countries, and it's not common for all the times and ages. And civil wars are the times when people are most uncertain about that. In 1919, writer Mikhail Prishvin wrote in his diary that everybody, even most calm people and scientists, behave as though there is a mad dog at large in front of their house. Just imagine if there is a civil war raging in the street, you cannot be certain, you cannot be confident that if you leave your home, nobody would kill you. It's compared with a mad dog. So peace and safety in the street is quite a necessary prerequisite for a civic society. And for that reason, even authoritarian governments are better than weak governments. When I say weak democratic governments, there is some conflict in in that phrase, because a weak government cannot be democratic. Civic society, democratic society are not compatible with a high rate of crime in the streets. If people do not believe in safety in the streets, people will unite in their own gangs, and the civic society will be ruined. So, but how can we really build those basic things for safe civic life? First of all, I think that it's quite absolutely necessary to have the rule of law and laws and efficient enforcement order. They serve the foundation for civic stability, and the legal system makes us confident that all conflicts can be resolved peacefully. And for a stable society, it's absolutely necessary. In the 20th century, some revolutionary regimes claimed that law and legal system was the bourgeois deception that can be replaced by some class-based order. But very soon people really decided that it was next to impossible to live in such society, and that their life and power is dependent on the system of laws. And the Soviet Union came to that conclusion. And even Stalin, when he launched the terror campaign, he came to the conclusion sooner or later that you cannot rule the country through terror only. So a law is strong just because it is in existence, and there are efficient and effective measures for its enforcement. In the majority of cases in Western societies, we do not involve court procedures to enforce justice. For us, it's just sufficient to know that there is a court's judiciary system and it's efficient and effective. Just one illustration. Once in my apartment house, new windows were installed, and on the first day when the worker finished his work, it was raining, and water was leaking inside the room. I wrote a letter about that to that worker, but no reply, no answer, and he never came. And I wrote a second letter. For the third time, I just told that worker that if he didn't come in 2 days, then I would have to call my lawyer. Immediately on the following day, that worker came to my apartment and fixed the problem. Well, probably it's kind of an enforcement, but the main idea is that I never had a lawyer. But the only mentioning of the lawyer helped me and made that worker fix the problem. And that's exactly the order based on law. Normally, people do not appeal to courts. It's a lengthy process, it's expensive, but when you are aware of that, it helps. Some researchers in the Chicago University started and examined behaviors and patterns of ordinary people, trying to figure out why people obey and comply with laws. And they came to the conclusion that people are guided not by some rational thinking, but they are guided just by the fact that the law existed, that the judiciary system existed. And the same researchers noticed that when people are engaged in some court trials, their impressions were mostly impacted not by the outcome of that trial, but by the fact if they were treated decently and fairly. So, what consolidates the foundation of the law-based system, the rule of law, is the belief that people live in the framework of the stable and very reliable rule of law system. Next comes money. It's also a very important phenomenon for a civic society, although that particular subject is very complex. And I explain you why. Mostly in all formations, in all historical organizations, there were money. They were different. Some shells, pieces of fabric, cloth, then coins, pieces of paper. Now it's all digital and it's all cash, money. So all those forms has something in common, and that is the fact that this money is trusted. And why? One may ask again. It seems to me that money can really consolidate our desire to trust and enhance economic efficiency. Noel Ferguson, who studied economic history, describes money as some portable power or a registered trust. I think that both definitions are correct, although trust is something that prevails. If people do not trust money, money is not a power, as it happens during hyperinflation periods. So during hyperinflation, people find some other ways to exchange goods and services. Although money stays to be most convenient way to exchange goods and services with people who you don't know, all other ways are less convenient and less productive. And money is really something that enables us to exchange goods and services with those people who we may have never met before or will never meet in the future, since we don't have any other reasons to trust them, but it's money that entrusts us. And in order to realize to what extent we transfer our trust to money, one should think how we cope with risks in our life. In Europe in Middle Ages, it was entirely different. I mean, taking risks when there were famines, epidemics, wars. It was quite common in the medieval Europe. So people were trying to be protected and defended primarily in their families, among their neighbors, in rural or urban communities. Reciprocity is a very good foundation for trust. And in those times, people also trusted their superiors, those who could protect them, give them land and feed them in case of a famine. People could also trust the church, clergy, or a monastery, meaning that they trust God and they attended religious ceremonies, prayings quite often. if there was a drought, they turned to God for help. They made pilgrim voyages and prayed to some icon. And let's see how we cope with the risks now. In Western societies, and most commonly in Russia now, we cope with the risks with the help of money and financial institutions in order to guarantee ourselves from some mischiefs such as robbery, fire, illness. We invest in insurance too. So insurance companies play a very great role in our economic lives. To be supported when we retire, we invest in pension funds. And to help those who are poor or physically disabled, the state normally builds a system of social care, and we pay taxes to support that. So we surround ourselves with all types of monetary relationships. But families, friends, they stay to be most common sources of support, but it's not that significant as it used to be. What are the common reasons for trust? I can quote Petra Stomka, the Polish sociologist, who used to say about the general culture of trust, and he lists the following reasons for that. First, it has to do with regulatory sequences and law, it meaning that law, morale, and other things are to be very closely related. So law is not a morale, and morale is not a law, but they are to be quite close. If so, people can communicate with each other quite confidently, and under the circumstances, as under such circumstances, trust can be an unconscious thing. So it's like flying with the help of an autopilot. When you don't notice routine things and pay attention only to something that is quite complex. The other reason or condition is stability. In any society, changes are inevitable, even in the system of laws and habits, but it's quite better if those changes are effected gradually, if changes are immediate and dramatic. People will lost their guidelines and they will not be confident in their routine behavior. They'll have to calculate when they can trust things and when they cannot. And mistrust, suspiciousness are on the rise then, and it's all it's even worse when people begin thinking that they are surrounded by enemies, and that leads us to some paranoia symptoms. Next comes openness, which is also very important. Living in a civic society, we need to have very reliable information telling us how our government works and how our social system is built. And also we should have knowledge on the economic life. This is the information that is to be presented in such a format that would be quite comprehensive for a common person. And you need to have an access to some ways of remedy, meaning how we can correct those shortcomings and how we can broadly discuss those things. And that is something that mass media should perform. And the role of mass media is quite significant for a civic society. If people lack information, if it is only a partial information or complicated information, if it's hard to discuss those ideas publicly, then again it's rumors, speculations, fears, and some feelings of conspiracy and paranoia theories will prevail. serving very fruitful ground for terrorist activities. So openness is quite important, and accountability comes next. When we have some cases of abuse, we need to have a possibility to make people accountable for those abuses so that damage can be repaired. And that serves a guarantee that official abuse on the part of officials will not turn to be a routine, so that the officials will normally perform their duties. Otherwise, those who suffer will really feel like being victims, and they will resist to the authorities, to laws, and that may lead to new hotbeds of social conflicts.
Actually, the Western society is far from ideal as well. Probably in the Great Britain, preconditions for the civil society are weaker and weaker, but that's a different story. So, our society is far from being considered as a model. Another thing of importance for the civil society building is a constitution, legal, state, order. And do we have to trust the state? This is the question. Do we have to trust the government? Yes, it's quite desirable because the government and the state are responsible for law and order. And without this function, we all suffer. People would always defend themselves if they have no guarantee from the state. Piotr Struve once said to a cadet party in 1906 and 07. He wanted cadets to work with the government and not against the government. On the other hand, even in the most impeccable democracy, you cannot trust government 100%, because the government consists of common people, normal people. They make mistakes. They diminish other people's interests, and they foster their own interests. Members of the government have a wider possibilities for abuse. That is why you should have a certain share of mistrust or distrust to people, and that's how the constitutional legal state is built. A parliament has to observe the activities of the government and inform the public if there are some violations or certain abuse. On the governmental side, the other task for the parliament is to consider drafts, to change these drafts or decline, to control the government activity is one of the most important part of activity for mass media as well. The legal state has another advantage. It can easily use the means of money as taxes or loans for social security issues. In the 90s of the last century, a Russian tax inspector was surprised when he was talking to his Swedish colleague. He was surprised how the Swedish state collects taxes. And he asked, "How come? How can you do it?" And the Swede answered, "Swedes pay taxes properly because they believe that other compatriots do the same, and the state decently disposes of this money for the purposes of use for the society. And the Russian inspector said to this, well, Russians are not willing to pay taxes because they think that their compatriots do not pay, especially the richest ones, and the corrupted politicians and businessmen take a big part of the tax money for their personal gains, not for public purposes. This is the issue of trust. And I think that the Russian tax service has changed since then. But that was the talk in the 90s. How shall we cultivate the trust? What capacities do we need to cultivate trust? And actually trust to something, trust and the trustworthy. If you trust in something indecent, it's useless. At best, at worst, it is harmful. Because then here comes deception, fraud, and the consequences may be unpredictable. To cultivate trust in the society, in the collectives, in the institutions, you have to have the presumption of trust, like presumption of innocence. In the public life, it's very important to have the presumption of trust when you deal with someone whom you don't know. When you meet a stranger, you usually give him the benefit of the doubts, hypothetical trust, because trust implies mutuality, and if you start with mistrust, our colleagues and interlocutors would respond along the same lines. If we start with mistrust or distrust, our acquaintance would be narrower, we would know much about each other, and our communication would be poorer. So giving advance in trust, we create the better atmosphere and we learn more about this particular partner. Maybe he does not deserve your trust, but if you start with presumption of distrust, you wouldn't be able to find it out. Mostly people feel this instinctively. When you get acquainted with someone new, you give this kind of advanced trust. But in economical and political lives nowadays, people behave differently, the other way around. At schools, at the universities, you have to cultivate this advance. Is necessary. Good teachers do this instinctively because they approach their students with trust, and to the parents of their school children because they have common goals. And in this regard, it's easy. But sometimes this trust is not supported by practical ends. So you should be able to change your attitude. But there should be presumption of trust, which is more fruitful than presumption of mistrust. Now about how it is done in our schools. In the 80s, our conservative governments introduced a mandatory curriculum in primary and secondary schools. And in the end of each year, all pupils were to pass an exam or pass exams in line with these plans. And the labor government in the 90s detailized these curricular plans. And in the long run, there was a table of your schooling to see how efficient every school is. Well, you can understand the desires of the government. The government wants to find out how efficient each particular school is, whether expenses for this school are, well, and they're justified. But these tables and these measurements, they provide mistrust towards professional level of teachers. And mistrust reproduces itself. And such systems stimulate bad behavior, meaning some tricky elements to increase your own rating. Probably you have this similar experience. In Great Britain, this is the case. It seemed that on the basis of these tables, parents would find better schools for their children, and then the trust would be restored, or deepened, rather. But schools behaved in such a way to get better results in the tables. Numerous schools did not allow bad students to pass exams. And it was layering between school children for good students and bad students, or losers. And losers were simply left unattended by teachers. And it was more difficult for school graduates to find a good job. And employers started complaining that they get graduates without necessary knowledge. So that really means that these losers were doomed to live an unsatisfactory life. As of 2010, our new coalition government, but mostly conservative one, introduced another yet policy. Academies appeared, free schools. These academies are free from local authorities' influence. They may be set by commercial companies or just by local parents. Such schools are to follow national plans only in 3 subjects: mathematics, natural sciences, and English language. All other subjects, they can create their own programs, but they may be inspected by school inspections. As a result of these new reforms, on the one hand, teachers are freer and the students work with less stress. On the other hand, such schools are not made where there is a deficiency of good schools. Usually, they are done where parents are more active and where there are companies with initiatives. That really means that such schools are made in more or less well-off neighborhoods. And these schools deepen social polarity because these new schools, they strengthen and not soften the mistrust between the rich and the poor. So social mistrust increases with the increase of inequality. Another harmful trend of these new academias, some of them are made in such parts of the country where we have religious and ethnic minorities, where they congregate. As a result, such schools are painted with religious tints. There were several cases recently in big towns, well, that in certain schools children are to study Quran by heart in Arabic language, and the majority of people do not speak Arabic. And this is the extreme case. I don't imply that this is a regular thing. Uh, in Birmingham recently, a school was closed down because there was a nest of Islamic terrorists, and the school children are prepared for jihad. Whether this is true or not, I cannot say. But one thing I know for sure: such schools do not increase but diminish the level of social trust in our country. So this religious and ethnic layering is very dangerous. In these new academies, you may teach without standard qualifications, meaning teachers are not qualified. As a result, school administrators deal with these teachers not as independent professionals, but as with hired workers. And you can command or order these people, and teachers know that they are not trusted. Their professional capacities are questioned, which undermines their morals. At schools, you have to listen to your interlocutors attentively. This is an art. You need it today specifically because with the help of electronic means now we conduct two-sided monologues. It's not dialogues, it's two-sided monologues. So what you really need is the ability to listen to your interlocutor, to what he says. And it's pretty tricky. It's not necessarily what we expect to hear, what we want to hear. So, what a person feels, what his personality is about. Do you have to respond directly, or you should be tactful in responding? How to avoid a conflict with this kind of a person? So you have to train such things. And of Of course, we grow up now in this world where this is not a given thing, you have to acquire it. But young people may play a very important role in the public life, and they may be happier, more efficient, and more productive. And for all of us, the important thing in supporting the social trust, well, you should do your best to be trustworthy in your family, in your public life. You have to observe professional norms and standards. You have to stick up to your word. You have to be a good family man, a good friend, a good teacher. You may think that this is not significant contribution, but that's the foundation of everything. So you should think about how to build up your such qualities inside yourself, because that's the foundation for the general social trust. That's the end of my presentation, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Professor Hosking, for a wonderful and proper lecture. Thank you for leaving time for discussion. Your questions. One thing, I understand Russian pretty well, but young people pretty often are too quick in their speaking. So please speak moderately. Kyrgyzia. I'm from Kyrgyzia. I have several questions. Describe trust in the first place. Give a definition. You mentioned several factors of trust. The question is, do we trust the civil society? Now, question 3. You said that in certain schools, school children study Quran by heart. Do you think that you mistrust this approach? I missed the last question. You said that at certain schools, children study Quran by heart. How does it work? Probably they trust this book. That's why they study it. Okay, definition of trust. I have this definition. Trust to people. If we think that this particular person would not act against my interests, would follow my interests, or would operate next to me, and there will be a mutual exchange of ideas. As to trust to events, well, for instance, we don't know what weather is going to be tomorrow or what will happen tomorrow. We trust, we think that events would not be harmful for us. But the word trust is close to many other words, like assurance, belief, faith, hope. In my book, which I published recently, I made a semantic plan or scheme of different words which are close to each other. So the word trust operates with other words, together with other words. And who is us? Who is us? People. What people? What people? Citizens of the Russian Federation. Citizens of the Russian Federation. Then it's up to you to respond to this, not to me. I cannot respond for the citizens of the Russian Federation. As to Quran, Muslims trust that Quran is the word of God. And in some Islamic schools, Quran in Arabic language is well written. It's nice. It sounds very well. So to learn Quran by heart, that's the foundation of everything. But in our society, well, it's not a Muslim society. We are quite secular, although Anglican Church still claims certain sovereign authority. But we are a secular society with different kind of beliefs. And if children study only Quran and nothing else, well, it will be difficult for them to live in our society. That's it. Islamists and Muslims, in their case, they trust Quran 100%, and I understand this. And probably it will help them in the Muslim society. But we live in a different society. We do not have a Muslim society. Is this response enough to your question? I would ask about psychological factor. People learn Quran by heart because they trust it. I am Victoria, a journalist from Moscow. Thanks for your lecture. You I raised a question, but it was left unattended somehow. What is the hindrance in development of trust in a traditional model of education? Maybe we need to change something for people to be more trustworthy towards the society. There are different traditions. We have an Anglican teaching in our public schools, in our private schools too. And there is a system of secular education. I am not a teacher myself, although I taught a lot at the university, but it had nothing to do with pedagogical science. So we say that our traditional education is too formal, and our children are incapable of listening to each other. Or you study certain texts, but these texts are far from a real life. These are some dead schemes. Nowadays, we try to change such approaches to introduce something new into education. But this new is also not new. I mean, it's dead from the very beginning. There are special tables of schooling, which I mentioned. So probably the initial idea was good, but the practical experience is not too good.
Я бы сказал, что образование имеет, кроме учения,
Education is not just schooling,
чтобы люди приобрели
it helps you to acquire
внимательный слух,
a habit of listening to each other, to hold a dialogue.
And this ability can be practiced in classrooms. At least I tried when I taught in a university. I taught European or Russian history, but I wanted my students to be capable of listening to each other, and not only just learning by heart what textbooks reads, and then I want them to generate their own ideas, to criticize their ideas and those of others. And I thought that in traditional pedagogical science, it's also very important. Okay, dear friends, any more questions? Yulia. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm Julia from Kaliningrad. Do you think people can learn how to trust? Can we teach them how to trust? And it can be achieved only through practice, since trust is not geography or history that can be taught. It's a kind of practical skill. And as I said, that practical skill starts with some advanced learning. When you start a new class, when you have new students, you don't know who will be the troublemaker. Those are the students who really arouse conflicts in the classroom. So, but anyway, when you start your classes, you give something to those students up front. You trust them all, but only later you understand how you can treat each individual student. I think that's the only way. And I never taught in schools. First, there was some time when I taught at school, but it was so long ago, I have forgotten about that already. But anyway, I think that that's the way to deal with your students. But again, it's up to you to decide. Thank you for the opportunity to ask my question. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Jeffrey. I'm Galina Denisova from the Southern Federal University. So I would like to thank the professor for a very interesting story and for emphasizing priority. It's not the first time I listen to Jeffrey, but every time he gives us very special emphasis. And when Jeffrey was telling us about the systems of control that were introduced in Great Britain to test teachers, and Jeffrey invited us to judge it from the trust standpoint. And again, that's the very appropriate time today. It has always been in schools, but even in universities now, the testing system is a very regimental system, and it's all regulation. And I understand that tomorrow everything will be on the web. And testing of teaching is supervised, and teachers have to prove that they are efficient all the time. And in this sense, and this background, there is another aspect, and it's about the attempts to introduce a single textbook on history. It's only recently that idea was given up. And for that end, we also need to understand if our approaches in teaching history are correct, both in school or in universities. And from that perspective, I would like to ask Jeffrey if in the UK there is a state-sponsored policy in the area of teaching history. And if there is such state-approved policy, then what the policy is like, and if there's any guidelines or some directives. And in general, do you think that the state should have a position in terms of teaching history? Thank you very much for that very interesting question. It's true that in the recent years, the UK government tried to introduce a new template, and it was not very much new. Rather, it was quite a strict approach to teaching history, and many teachers of history resisted to that. And it's about the traditional understanding of the UK history, and British Empire was a very good institution, and that there was always a constitutional monarchy in the UK, and the UK saw the first industrial revolution in the world, and everything is to be based on patriotism. Well, actually, I'm looking at the processes both in this country and in UK as parallel ones, and I'm very much interested in learning your recent experience. Since both the government understands the government approaches both school and university education and history as something that is to be very much utilitarian, and everything is viewed from the perspective of of increasing national income. Very recently, universities began being subordinated to businesses and innovations, and education became quite a piece of applied approach. While the Conservatives in the UK want young Brits to believe that Great Britain is the best place to live in the world, that the law system is the best and the economy is most productive, and they want them to look back into history and see how it all evolved. But for me, this approach is too simple, is too simplified, and we should resist to that. And I'm glad that that's exactly what many professors and school teachers do. And it's good that any single opinion has not prevailed yet. It's true that we should really be aware of some facts and figures. That approach is quite acceptable, but we need to be able to discuss those things. We should be aware that there could be different sources of information, and we should understand why. That's something that which is most important, and it's not only for those who would like to make history their profession. It's very important for common people. Because if they are prepared, they will not take for granted everything that is presented by mass media or some other people, so that they would fruitfully discuss and challenge all those views. But I'm interested to learn if, in your case, something similar is being done, because looking at the reforms that the Russian Academy of Sciences is experiencing, as well as some other universities, I have an impression that our processes go in parallel. A microphone, please. Do you share the point of view that a textbook is a Bible in at the lessons, while a teacher's role is confined only to that of a moderator? And then a question arises. How should we treat Professor Chibaryan and his concept on the history textbook for Russia?
Какая-то историческая схема
I think that we need some pattern, some template, since it's true that there were some facts in history and that battle that was waged in a certain year or parliamentary act. But the question is how we should filter those facts. And for that end, textbooks are quite essential. You need to know the documentary foundation of the subject you are learning. By those textbooks may present not a single opinion, but two, three, and even more. It's quite an abstract consideration. However, I believe that's quite the gist of history and the usefulness of history just for training, for raising young people. And I mean that it's not the facts that are important to know, but you should be also capable of discussing some things of some religious movements and ethnic movements, the reasons they appeared, and you need to know why a parliamentary act so-and-so was adopted, and who was against that. I think that's something that the history is about. And speaking of that, Professor Chibaryan, next week he will be visiting London, and I'll meet and talk to him.
он прежде всего,
By and large,
я его
and actually,
ценю.
I highly appreciate that gentleman. He is a fair person, and he finds himself in a difficult situation. He is maneuvering, but his objective are quite positive. I'm not keeping the exact track of all the events and the situation. Perhaps you will say something different. But I don't like an idea that there should be a unified, not only the scheme of facts, but the scheme of opinions too. I don't like that approach. Okay, please, more questions. I'm Irina Yukimovich from the University of Bryansk. Jeffrey, for my colleagues from Bryansk and for me, your idea that you first need to raise and upbring the heart and the soul of a young person before you start training their minds is quite close to us. I think it's quite important. But my specific question is like this. For quite some time, I think since 1997, we've been using a technology, that's a discussion technology, which we refer to as a civic forum. That's only one technology. We are looking for some more technologies that our colleagues, teachers are using, and they're using those technologies at improvement courses. So if we speak about your interaction with students, your teaching students, do you really have some specific technologies that would help you to shape their abilities to listen? What is a civic forum? What is a format? It's kind of a discussion technology. the technology this is meant for generating the common public view on some important problem. When we are confronted with three or four approaches, and we discuss all pros and cons. So each participant can see what valuable is in somebody else's position and what can be changed in his own position. Sounds well to me. Sounds good.
Учить, то есть
And
способности,
to
как предмет,
to develop such a property, you cannot teach us as an ordinary subject. And I think that a good teacher, first of all, serves a good example for their students. So when a teacher speaks, they present the subject in some abstract way, and he gives food for thought, and normally such presentation is followed by a discussion. And you cannot respond only negatively to those points that students make. It doesn't work. Rather, you should focus on something reasonable that your students say. But I should really explain to you that I'm a retired professor, and in the earlier days, I don't think I used any technologies. I actually lectured in a traditional way, as many other professors did, using some probably maps, charts of dates, and lectures were followed by practical classes and seminars, and we discussed material that was presented at a lecture. Normally, it was 10 to 12 students that made a workshop group, and it was quite difficult to see to it that everybody of the group spoke, since we understand that at least half of the group is always shy people, and you need to provide some incentives to them. And there are some other people who are easy talkers, and you should also take care of them and channel them to the right path. It's quite an art, and I'm not quite sure that I really did everything well, although I always saw it as my objective, but I don't think that there was any specific technology. Any more questions, dear friends? Please. I'm Eldal Razimov from the Republic of Karelia. My question, Jeffrey, if I understood right from your presentation, one of the foundations of trust is the close proximity of morality and law systems. In Russia, we have a lot of ethnic groups, and whose customs differ very much, and it affects the morality, which also differs. So it leads us to a situation that some laws that a number of ethnic groups think perfect are quite hard to be implemented by some other ethnic groups. So I think it means that we need to make some weighted averaged laws, or otherwise we will ignore some customs of some ethnic groups. I remember your interview about the differences between the Russian Empire and the British Empire. And you said that British Empire promoted the emergence of the British nation, while the Russian Empire slowed down the process of the emergence of the Russian nation. So don't you think that those new laws will also play the role of the brakes that slow down those processes? Well, it's a very hard question. I think it's a key question. And we ask similar questions in the UK, since in the past decades there were numerous waves of immigrants from other countries practicing different religions, and they make their own communities in many UK cities. And there are some neighborhoods in the cities that are nearly mono-ethnic. Say Bradford, in the city of Bradford, in some neighborhoods, nearly 100% of the population come from Pakistan. Perhaps not newcomers, but those whose origins are in Pakistan, and they retained their habits. And so the problem is quite hard. Inside those communities, they will always have their own practices, customs, and even informal laws, and sometimes judiciary. Since in practice they often apply the laws of Sharia and not our civic laws. On the one hand, you cannot ban it, but on the other hand, you cannot allow it to become common. I can tell you one thing, and if the system of law is quite rigid, strong, and this spreads throughout the country, then those communities they will interact with the general framework, and gradually those communities get adapted to the environment and the dominating customs in the environment, since the hardest systems that evolve they evolve in those cases when immigrants are not many. Since, say, most tolerant city in the UK is London, because there is a lot of immigrants, and we got accustomed to each other. And immigrants or children and grandchildren of original immigrants, they speak standard English, and you cannot tell them from original Brits. They went to our schools, to our universities. They have professions of lawyers, financiers, teachers. In other cities, situation is more complex, and where a local population is not accustomed to living in a mixed ethnic society. I think that when it comes to third generation, mostly those conflicts become smoother, but in the first two generations, and it's quite a lengthy period, the problem is quite acute. Now, as we know, in most of the European societies, it is an issue. Children and grandchildren of immigrants, there are children and grandchildren of immigrants who do not feel their roots. They do not have a solid ethnic and religious foundation, and it's exactly those people who easily go to extremes, and it's exactly for those people who are contracted by terrorists and move to Syria, to Iraq, to wage a war, as it's happening in case with this Islamic State movement. And it's typical of the UK, Germany, and many other European countries. So that's quite an issue. I'm not saying that it is easy, but we should at least try to establish such an environment, establish such a situation, and to really create conditions that those immigrants may communicate with a broader society, and based on the rule of law. And we can allow last question. Dear Professor, I'm Maji Murzeev from Dagestan. Thank you very much for your great contribution. You said that we need to promote trust, and that trust is both useful, fruitful, and harmful. And I would like to refer to some three sayings. It's about the UK. Britain doesn't have eternal enemies, it has eternal interests. In one of the Soviet movies, Valentin Gaft used to say that if you betray somebody timely, it's not betrayal, it's a deal. And kindness can be perceived as weakness, is another saying. Well, in that background, is it possible to identify the level of trust or the scope of trust, if you can think of that? Thank you very much again. That's quite a significant and another hard question. Kindness is weakness. Well, in some instances, it's true. And when I say that trust in our case is something that is paid upfront, I'm not saying that it's limitless. And if a person quite clearly cannot deserve that upfront payment, then you'd better don't trust that person. But we should start from the presumption of trust. And I did say that if you trust a person who is not reliable, who does not deserve trust, then in the best case it's useless, and in the worst case is harmful. I'm not saying that you need 100% trust in all instances, but you should really you should understand that it's very hard, to see the clear boundary between trust and mistrust. It's like, a good music hearing. It is to be trained. And it's very hard to cultivate such a capability. It's true about the organization and teams. And again, we should start from the presumption of trust. And if something goes wrong grossly, then you need to understand what the reason is. So you need to start mistrusting. You need to inquire what is going on wrong, what the reason is of that conflict. Say students complain that the professor underperforms. And for managers, perhaps it's the hardest to see and to see when you should really 100% trust and when you should start mistrusting. I don't know how they cope with that in the business schools, but I think that to develop that particular property is possible only when you start from trust, and then you'll see where, or should be able to see where that trust ends. Dear friends, I think Anastasia told you at the beginning, but again, I call upon you to take Professor Hosting's books on trust. And, so you will read and understand the fundamentals about trust. You'll see how important the institute of trust is for all aspects of our life. And the only thing left is to thank the professor for his excellent presentation. Have a nice lunch. We will reconvene in 1 hour.